Hello, welcome to Scary Thoughts, Horror, Philosophy, Culture. I'm Mark Cate.
And I'm Chad Lott.
This is episode 69. We're going to be talking about the Steven Soderbergh movie from 2011, Contagion. How timely. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. And you can also sign up for our newsletter at scarythoughts.org. Give us your information. We'll send out a newsletter. I promise we really will this time. And do you have anything to plug?
Nope.
Other than your Forsythia brand?
Yeah, I will be selling Forsythia on Amazon.com under my affiliate page. So please go there and keep yourself safe with pseudoscience.
Okay, let's just get right into it. Last thing, spoilers ahead for the movie Contagion. So just right off the top, this was my idea. I pitched it, but was sort of unsure about wanting to do it. I felt like on one hand, it's very timely, it's very interesting, it's on all our minds, and when I proposed it, it wasn't even to the degree we're looking at right now, because every day it just seems to be getting more and more out of control. But I was unsure about doing it too, because we often approach things with a certain sense of humor and dismissiveness and condescension to our whatever. And sort of felt like I didn't know if doing a podcast that could potentially be jokey about something this potentially serious would be in bad taste, or if that would be a line that would be just kind of difficult to walk. I didn't want to underplay it. But then, of course, I realized, well, this is where we are, so not talking about it is ridiculous. So.
I think if this movie wasn't so excellent, I would have been less interested in doing the episode of the podcast. Like, I wouldn't have wanted to just do let's do a Contagious episode with The Stand. Like, I like just talking about, because we're not a current events show.
Right.
Although I do think that condescension and humor is always appropriate, pretty much.
It's true.
Yeah. But the research that went into it is so relevant to what's going on now, I think is what's kind of interesting about it. And then, the interconnectedness of the film, the way that that hyperlink filmmaking that people talk about with Soderbergh, where, this thing over here connects to this thing over here. And there's this chain of events that kind of lead towards this crescendo. It's kind of like what happens in Ocean's 11. I think that really mirrors things in our economic supply chain right now. I think so. I think that too also makes this movie really interesting to talk about now.
Yeah, absolutely. But of course, I guess my primary concern is that I want to talk about the film Contagion, but there's no way to not let it heavily spiral off into a discussion of COVID-19, and simultaneously wanting to be sensitive to the fact that there's a very real human cost to everything that's going on right now. But also, so this movie is about something that is potentially very real, and we're witnessing how real it is. But it's interesting to see how we're in this moment that's showing us our strengths and failures as a world, as a culture, as a microculture. We're really seeing what we're prepared for, what we're not, how our friends are reacting. We're really seeing, this is this real stress test. And it's interesting thinking about narrative. And if we were looking at this as a narrative, and often when thinking about narrative, I think of something Dan Harmon, the creator of Community and Rick and Morty and a lot of other things, brings up, which is what he likes to do is have a character and then take away everything from them. And then you really get to see what that character is made of as they try to rebuild their life. And that's the struggle, and that's the vector of the narrative. And that's sort of what we're looking at the moment, is we're going to be seeing a lot of things being taken away from a lot of people, and see what's left. What are they made of? How do they react? And right now it's mostly just threat. And a lot of people are not dealing very well. And so we're really seeing what they're made of. I mean, I feel like that's what the majority of the news is. It's partly information about what to do and how to wash your hands, but mostly just how people are dealing.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think the facts of how that all this got started and how it gets started in the movie, they're just identical. The wrong bat meets the wrong pig. That shit is real. Wet markets are definitely a fucking problem. And are they going to be addressed? Probably not. So you're just going to keep having this shit happen.
Well, they have that addressed in the past, and then they got rolled back.
Yeah.
The controls got rolled back. So now we're back here. And to believe that China will institute a bunch of laws that'll then get rolled back again seems pretty likely. That's just what we do.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of like the people who are like kind of pro China think that like their particular brand of like doing things is great, and for the people
Who is that?
there are people out there who like the idea of I read in a book that Superpowers AI book. Can't remember the title of it right now, but they talk about how some people had this like the idea of this autocratic government's ability to just turn things around really fast, like the idea that if something happens you could just deal with it super fast because you don't have to ask anybody, you just do it. And you see like, well, that's not really a thing. That's
it's
kind
not.
of a thing that fucks up really bad. And
No, it's
like
the opposite. And authoritarian regimes, I mean, that is exactly what happened with Chernobyl. In a society where everybody is afraid of their superiors, where there is heavy, heavy, heavy top down, all you get is people afraid to speak truth. And I'm not talking about truth to power. I mean, truth. And that is what happened as far as we can understand it with COVID-19. Is a bunch of people had concerns and they were silenced. Some of them might be missing. I don't know. That's some of what I'm reading.
Yep.
But also in our own government, we have the leader of the leader of the free world speaking in front of a bunch of scientists, lying outright, and none of them are contradicting him because they're afraid of him. So it's obviously a very different situation between America and China and it's the Soviet Union during Chernobyl. But it also reminds me of that. You ever hear that Radiolab episode about the airline pilots? It's not the best podcast, but it's this episode that I do recommend that is about how Korean pilots switched to using English because the way of deferential language, the way it's built into Korean, led to a really, really bad plane crash.
Weird.
And they realized that, it's linguistic. It's built in where the co-pilot is so subordinated to the pilot because of linguistic hierarchy that if they just use English, they become more able to communicate equally, and the co-pilot actually has power, not total subordination to the pilot.
Man, freedom's just built into our grammar. How great is that?
And watching the way some of what's playing out in America is really, I think, revealing of the degree, we can go like, he's a fascist, but to speak realistically, well, there is this fear he's instilling in people that is keeping truth difficult to proliferate. He's got the biggest megaphone and he's using it to spread lies, and the people who have the actual truth are standing right next to him and they're afraid to correct him.
Yeah. And then there's also the people who are just so inflamed by him that they're using like every opportunity to take him down, which is a thing that happens. And I think that like, even when you're running a story that's anti-Trump that is completely correct, is it the time for it? You know what I mean? Like maybe let's have more messaging about like.
Well, it is if it's correcting with truth.
Yeah.
Which I mean, I totally hear what you're saying, and I mostly agree. But there is a thing of going like, he's a fucking liar. Don't listen to his lies. Here are the lies. Here's the truth. This will help save lives. That's pretty real, and it is simultaneously political. But everything is political. We now live in this reality where speaking the truth is politically loaded, and that's a fucking problem.
Yeah, but we're also in the time too where it's like everybody has their own interpretive truth.
Yeah.
So it's just weird. I mean, you see it right now with like toilet paper hoarding, right? Like there's really no reason that should be happening. Like
No.
I mean, like hoarding dry goods, hoarding like some food because you don't have to go out, or maybe some machine guns and bullets because you're afraid of potential civil unrest, makes a lot more sense to me than toilet paper. Like those companies are still making that stuff.
Yeah.
And there's a run on it. But then again, it's not like it's like, like I was able to buy some today. So it's not a real problem.
It's
like,
It's so bizarre. It's almost like
weird.
it's a meme.
Yeah.
It's a meme of scarcity. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, people are stealing toilet paper because I guess it's really valuable. I better get some.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
To me, it just shows like how irrational certain people are. And then, then you see at the same time, there's like people who've hoarded all this stuff, but you're in a line with like 250 people to buy it. So it's like, okay, well, that's way more dangerous than you having to use a fucking shower head on your ass, like a couple weeks in,
And
like,
far less pleasant.
yeah, like, what are you doing, man?
Okay, let's talk about the movie for
Yeah.
let's try to weave the Contagion into our conversation about how we're all going to die here. I feel like looking at this movie, the genre it is, I mean, it's definitely a thriller, but it definitely mirrors zombie movie.
It's also a detective story, which is pretty rad.
Oh, I didn't really think of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, there's a long tradition of medical detective stories. It's just a thing. I mean, you see House MD, for example, is a good example of the whole genre, which is basically just a Sherlock Holmes story retold. And that's one of the things I like about this is how it's procedural is really interesting to me.
Yeah. It also sort of is a horror movie, or maybe partly like a slasher, because infidelity is brutally punishable. Mm-hmm. Gwyneth Paltrow, she hooks up with a guy and then dies, so she's punished for her.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like what I really like about that whole plot line is that it just shows more of their life. So you sort of understand more of them, you understand more of her, and she's basically she's not patient zero, but she's like patient one. And I think it gives her like a humanity, and it also gives the doctor the really hard moment where she kind of sort of like tells the guy that she's been cheating, and that's how he discovers is in this really interesting way. Like it's a really interesting way of rolling out a trope, like the cheating wife that brought doom upon the family. But that's a thing that's like a Shakespearean thing, really.
True.
And it's just mobilized in a very different way in this movie that I think is cool.
It also, for me, mirrors the zombie survival guide. Max Brooks, who wrote the book World War Z before it was turned into an abomination of a movie.
It's okay. It's an okay movie.
Oh, no, it's not even that good. Don't argue.
It's okay.
Before that, what led him to write that pretty amazing book, World War Z, is the Zombie Survival Guide, which is sort of like a jokey, it's not that far from things like the Preppy Handbook.
It's exactly like the Preppy Handbook. I think that's like the best comparison.
But the thing about the Zombie Survival Guide is he went the distance. Like, he did a lot of very serious research. And why World War Z is such a good book is because it takes very seriously the questions of what a zombie apocalypse would look like, and really articulates answers to so many questions of, well, what would the world be like if this really, really happened? And almost as preparation for that piece of literature was this sort of jokey book, Zombie Survival Guide, because it also takes that pretty seriously. Like, this is how the world is now, here's how to survive. And I feel like Contagion is similar because it's so perfunctory. This movie has actually very little drama. It's incredibly detail-oriented about what would it really be like if this happened. And it's hard to find fault in this movie with what did it get wrong?
Yeah.
Where did it round off corners of things that would be actually, it would have happened this way? I think the only thing that I could find criticism as far as its realistic portrayal of this situation is that there would be far more scientists involved. And this movie is full of scientists, all collaborating and getting fired and shuffling their ideas off to other people. But actually the reality is there's infinitely more people in the chain of information that would actually take on, what's the strain called in Contagion? NEV1? Was that it?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that like the technical details of this movie are really impressive. Like in dialogue, a lot of times like technical jargon sounds fucking hokey and just terrible. It doesn't sound uncredible at any point in this movie, in my opinion, and then it doesn't stop to explain things in a really cheesy way. They just like hit you with some jargon. And you're like, okay, well, I'll just assume I'll work that out in my mind, and you move on. Different characters, the trajectory of the virus through the world is unfolded with different characters, and it part of like the style of filmmaking that hyperlink filmmaking where the events are just pinging around to these different characters, and they're all given like human moments of failure, I think, that make them really good characters. Like the Lawrence Fishburne character gets his wife out of Chicago. Like he breaks protocol and does that. And then he gets his the janitor of the building's kid the vaccine at the end without telling anybody else about it. Like I like the idea that people make these personal selfish choices throughout the film because anyone would.
Yeah.
You know.
I also feel like because this movie is so, in a sense, perfunctory and non-dramatic in a traditional sense of, you don't get a lot of emotional weight in this movie. Like, Matt Damon is so detached. The doctor who delivers his news is such a cold bastard. Gwyneth Paltrow gets sick and dies pretty fast, and you don't get to sit with her suffering for very long. You know, it really goes from scientist to body bags to scientist to body bags. And Lawrence Fishburne, it's easy to overlook that Lawrence Fishburne is kind of an amazing character in this movie. Even his coaching of Kate Winslet's character is kind of beautiful. You know, he's constantly checking in with her. He's not overdoing it. He's being very kind of almost scripted about it, but making sure she's getting what she needs. But he's also being very pragmatic. Like, you can't help these people without sleep.
He's like a good boss.
He's a good boss. Yeah. Oh, Lord.
It's like you hope that like there's like sensible, credible people in these roles. You know, these really important, these roles that deal with nature as it is, not nature how you want it to be. Like This is just a fucking fact, like an earthquake. Like there's no, like I guess there are responses that could be better or worse for sure. We're seeing that now around the world. But even the best responses still have a disease whipping through. And this disease, one of the big differences between the movie and what's going on now is like the rate of death. Like there's like 20% death rate in this movie, which is fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Like streets would be empty like as they are. I'm surprised that there's not more rioting and shit in the film. It doesn't go like full children and men at any point. Yeah. But maybe that's just a condition of like you don't really see the economy 6 months after the events of this film.
Right. Which is what I'm certainly dreading in this moment.
Yeah. I love how this movie starts on day 2. Like it starts in motion.
Yeah.
And I love that Gwyneth Paltrow's character has a really stupid job. She's a director of operations for marketing, like which seems really important when you're in it. Like this is pretty much like the kind of shit I do. But she's just over there doing PR for a factory that's opening. There's really no actual real need for her to be over there.
It seems like her job is to be charming.
Yes. And then she comes back and like it's just this decision that a company needs somebody like her to be flying around, and that's just another disease vector up in the air.
You caught that it's her company that is running the crane that knocks the tree down that launches the bats.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because environmentalism. Something that I thought of when thinking about this as a horror film and filtering it through the things we often talk about is the idea of collective dread, of course, that like it's so fucking like absurdly real to think about how does this connect to the dread we all feel. If we were talking about a zombie movie, it would be like, oh, well, we have these fears about globalism and the spread of infection and things like that. Yeah. And then this movie that's kind of exactly like a zombie movie is like the literal example of all of this. But it also is an example of a narrative where the enemy is nature. And it also reminds me of something I think we talked about in our Cabin in the Woods episode, or certainly The Witch, where your thing of like the forest wants you dead.
Yep.
That the natural state of things is nature trying to destroy you. And that's definitely something that this movie plays out. Oh, this just made me think of, so my mom, who's in an age group that is most certainly at risk and also is immunity compromised. Hi, Mom, if you're listening. Love you. I called her on Monday morning just to check in, like, how are you doing? Like, how are you feeling about all this? And her response was really interesting because I would think she's the most at-risk person on earth, right? But her response was like, oh, I've been overdoing everything that's being recommended right now for years. I totally overdo all of this. When people cough, I leave the room anyway. So I'm not worried about this at all. Yeah. Because everything they're recommending is something that's totally ingrained in me. I didn't expect that.
Yeah, my dad's in an old folks home right now, and they're locked down. You know, there's no in and out right now, and he's not too bummed out about it. You know, he's like, if I get it, at least I'm already in a hospital bed.
Whoa.
Yeah, I guess like I haven't seen too much super hysterical behavior. But in the movie, there isn't too much hysterical behavior either, except for when the government is like rationing things out and then they run out. Like in that,
Well, there's the supermarket scene as well.
yeah.
But it also does frame the online hysteria.
Mm-hmm.
This is a pretty early movie. I mean, it's not like the internet was fresh then, but the role that
Jude
Law plays, that kind of personality already existed, but that kind of online personality I don't think was quite where it is today yet.
Yeah, it reminded me too that like I think one of the reasons why conspiracy has proliferated through the internet so much is that the first people to really get like huge, interesting audiences, a lot of them were conspiracy or at least like, non-mainstream voices, just really interesting people. And some of them, rose and became pretty innocuous. Like Joe Rogan, for example, I think is a good example. Like you would hear in the early days of that show, discussions about moon landing, hoax theories and stuff like that. And there still is a little bit of that on. I think it's mostly tongue in cheek now, but his interview with the CDC head recently is probably the best interview to listen to if you wanted to understand the stakes of what's happening right now. But the Jude Law character is so interesting to me because he's profiting off of scaring people away from the vaccine and into this like quack homeopathic thing. And like Jim Baker, the fucking televangelist from the 80s, is literally doing that right now with some weird silver colloidal bullshit. And then
your buddy Alex Jones.
Yeah, Alex Jones getting in trouble for selling some sort of bullshit toothpaste or something. It's just amazing that, although I guess people are seeing through it faster now. I feel like in the old days, people would have like, they would have been able to run that hustle a little bit longer.
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, there's so much here. But then it's easy to point a finger at those guys as being like, that's anti-science and you're profiting from it. But then again, Trump goes to the CDC and yammers about how smart and great he is. So he's selling his brand, which is absolutely, he stands to profit infinitely more than Baker or Jones do from selling a physical object. When he goes on the news and bloviates about himself, rambles about how smart he is, and doesn't seem to take anything seriously from the people that are surrounding him.
I don't know. Who knows? Like I don't pay attention to him, so who gives a shit from my perspective? Like
I'm so jealous.
For me, like the thing with Trump is like to me, I've just always thought the government is terrible for just different reasons. Like I know people like take issue with this or whatever, but my whole thing, whenever you think the words, oh, the government should, imagine your least favorite politician and replace the word government with that person's name. And that's kind of how I feel about the whole thing. Like when you're like, oh, the government should help people, think, oh, Trump should help people. Like how well is that going to go? Because for every Obama or whoever you like, there's going to be a terrible person. And that's just always, the pendulum swings, right?
Sure.
So to me, you want that system to have as little power as possible outside of things like, government agencies that do shit like the CDC, for example. But the Jude Law character is, to me, one of the most interesting characters in this movie because he clocks it first. Like he's the person who sees the potential of the problem very first. And he's sort of like, people don't listen to him. And he's sort of, it's almost interesting. Like he's so marginalized that it gives him this like an outsider view that allows him to see this black swan event. And his only real way to be rewarded for it is to do this like bullshit forsythia thing, And then he talks, one of the things he talks about, like I'm definitely not an anti-vaxxer, but he talks about how when you run a vaccine through super fast, there are unintended consequences.
Of course.
That's true. That's like a real thing that happens, Is it a reason not to take a COVID-19 vaccine? Probably not, like you should do the thing, but will there be lawsuits down the road about it? For sure there will be, like that's just to happen. That's why there's this really long process that costs billions of dollars to get medicine into production. Like you don't want it to fuck people up. Like there's a Lyme disease vaccine that works for most people, but it fucks up a lot of people. So it's not on the shelves anymore. So it's just like that, all that shit's so weird, but I love that they do kind of give him the first nod in the movie. Like he's the guy who like he spots it.
But then the roll down is not necessarily, again, it's not just this sort of predatory, opportunistic entrepreneurship. Because in this movie and in what we're facing today, it's easy to see information as a virus, but there's information about the virus.
Yeah.
And there's information as a virus, and they seem to be running in tandem.
Yeah.
And so I feel like there is a need to practice good personal hygiene by washing your hands and don't touch your face, but there's also hygiene of communication that needs to take place.
Yeah.
To keep away from this fucking nonsense, unless you are, I mean, to further the metaphor, unless you're well inoculated and well educated about how this stuff functions and how to be taken in by so much of it, it's best to just stay away.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think how powerful some people are. Like if Oprah got on TV and just said some crazy off the wall shit, people would probably do it. I mean, like resveratrol, for example, she's basically greenlit Dr. Oz's quackery.
It's amazing.
Now just put that into like a really dangerous situation like this.
Well, it also opens up questions that I definitely have about homeopathy and things like that. I mean, part of the irony, okay, I was thinking about, this is a horror movie, and like, who's the final girl? Haha, she dies first, or dies very early. But Gwyneth Paltrow is a forsythia seller. That's what Goop is. It's forsythia. She's a snake oil salesman.
Yes.
So it's very poetic that she is patient zero in a movie that calls out ideas like snake oil. It's funny, the final yoga class I took before deciding I wasn't going to go take yoga anymore.
So bad for you, yoga. So bad for you.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Exposes you to all these heavy breathing people with bad hygiene. It's fucking terrible.
As opposed to what?
Just like staying
running on a treadmill.
In your own house. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's awesome.
Well, back when it felt a little safer, the final yoga class I took, the teacher was great. And I don't want to be too mean about this, but at the beginning of class, she was, and if anybody needs some, I have this tincture that's good for boosting your immunity, blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't an antiseptic for your hands. She was dripping it on people's wrists to rub together. So it was like this, when things smell nice and you think they bring you good health. Aromatherapy. And then she was like, okay, so before class, if everybody could grab 2 blocks and a blanket. And I'm like, we know for a fact that touching shit that other sweaty, slobbering people have touched spreads the disease. Your stinky wrist isn't going to do a fucking thing but put money in the pocket of whoever made it and make you, I mean, the room smelled great, so I can't. The room did legitimately smell like cloves and orange peel. So, but that kind of infuriated me.
Well, the thing about it is, like, does that make people engage in riskier behavior because they think that they are now somehow inoculated against whatever, you know?
See, the thing is, there's that fine line. It's sort of the difference between selling a tincture and spreading bad information. So, or selling forsythia versus spreading bad information. So they might not feel inoculated, but that's what a lot of sort of homeopathy, I feel, preys upon, which is people believing that this money they're spending can't hurt, can help, or can't hurt. And the thing is, it's an outrageously huge industry, and that money could actually go towards things that absolutely do help, like immunization,
Right.
like painkillers for people who are suffering.
Oh, dude, when I worked at Whole Foods, in the marketing department of Whole Foods, every year there would be a cold and flu season, and almost everything sold in the whole body department at Whole Foods is fucking worthless for keeping you not sick. Like, there's a lot of stuff that can bring you relief. You know, there's a lot of great, like, I think the beauty products are awesome because they don't have a bunch of fucked up shit in them. You know, most of it's made with, you know, like fair trade stuff. So all like from the economics of it, I like those products. But there's like elderberry and sambucus and all this shit. It doesn't do anything, but it's promoted through cold and flu season every year. And it's like, man, like how much do people buy that shit and then not buy something that actually might help them, like fucking zinc and magnesium and vitamin C? You know, like, oh, I like this elderberry.
Which may or may not do things as well.
Well,
I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, it may or may not, but there's at least a little bit of like clinical evidence for that stuff.
Right.
There's zero clinical evidence for elderberry.
I bumped into some friends on the street on Wednesday night, and they had recently been to a crystal fair where people were like handling crystals, and they were apparently unconcerned about common contact because crystals have healing power. Good luck.
Yeah, yeah. But, people just believe some dumb shit, man. Like, you just can't stop people from believing in shit
No, you
like that.
can't. And what we were talking about earlier about, this is a stress test and we're going to see what people are made of and what our cultures are made of and how people deal with things. You would think that this kind of moment would potentially shake out some of the lies, but it will not.
Yeah,
and that is so maddening.
It's so weird. Like, I mean, to me, there's really not much difference between handling some fucking rose quartz amongst a bunch of other disease vectors and these fucking dudes that are licking the stones in Iran right now. Like, these mullahs are like, look the stones. It proves that God will not destroy us. It's like, whoa, dude, you're making out with the temple. It's fucking gross, for one. And two, like, you're spreading disease around.
We're the same people who burned witches because of bad crops. We are still that species, and using superstition against real world problems is not going away.
I don't think you can get it out of people. I think that there's just something ingrained in people's brains that make them function like that. I think it's better to think about, like, okay, well, how do you harness those impulses, towards things like, I have this weird thing from Mormons. I like Mormons as people or whatever. They believe some kooky fucking bullshit, but a lot of that energy from their religion makes really nice people and, pretty well-behaved kids. So it's like, can you harness this crazy shit that's in people's brains, like their amygdala response or whatever? Can you harness it for good, reliably? I don't know, man. I have no idea.
Yeah. The weird thing to me about all this is that hope actually works. Whatever we mean by hope, whatever we mean by works, that the placebo effect is real, that prayer actually gives people longevity, that there are sort of non-scientific factors that contribute to this, that make, what I find difficult is that it makes these discussions about, like, let's say homeopathy, not completely dismissible, because the one part of taking herbal tinctures with no scientific proof to back it up, what makes that not completely dismissible is there is a part of it that if it's giving people hope, it will actually help them through their illnesses to some quantifiable degree. But so then it could be anything.
Yeah, it's super weird.
It's
like
weird.
You see these like studies where, like, oh, there's a statistically significant bump from a placebo. You're like, well, why? Like, well, that's super interesting. Why does that seem to happen sometimes?
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know. Back to the movie.
Okay.
Soundtrack, excellent.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah, Cliff Martinez, I think, does a good job with it. I like that it's like that particular type of music, that electronic bleepy soundtrack is sort of a timeless soundtrack. Like, I didn't feel like watching this movie, it didn't feel dated at all. Like, it came out 2011.
Yeah.
I feel like it could have come out this year. Like, there's really like nothing, there's some, like, a flip cell phone or something like that kind of gives it away. But other than that, it's pretty good. And it's interesting how, like, the soundtrack can shift very slightly to be like hopeful sounding, but then also really terrifying, like using almost the same tonality. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. Sure.
Same thing with like the color treatment of the film, like those blues that go through the whole thing that kind of give it this doom and gloom, like forever winter feel is really interesting.
Yeah. The star-studded cast is also pretty remarkable. There are so many solid actors in this movie. Again, most of them being so deadpan. This is a movie with, again, like Lawrence Fishburne and Kate Winslet and Jude Law, et cetera, and they are all mostly deadpanning it. They're all mostly just sort of like being serious, trying to persevere, and then they walk off the screen. It's not a really good actor vehicle for anybody, but I sort of feel like that's a thing that Soderbergh does. Is he doesn't bring a lot of emotional weight to his scenes. The emotional weight is usually implied. I feel like even when someone's crying in a Soderbergh scene, it doesn't drive a lot of empathy from the audience the way it would be under another director's hand.
Well, he's not like manipulating the emotion with the camera. He's just showing it. Like the very end scene of Matt Damon crying because he's looking through the camera and his daughter's having her downstairs prom or whatever. Like that is an extremely emotional scene, and he's selling it. It's not like he's doing a terrible job at it. But the way the camera is like distant from him and it's just framed and it's not moving, it's just showing him go through this thing. It's like you're observing it, like almost like a YouTube video or something like that. Yeah, the photography is not emotional for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another framing it in a horror movie context is the idea of progressive entrapment. And it's funny to think about. It's sort of exactly stated by Lawrence Fishburne's character. They're expressing concerns about, how did this happen? Can the bird flu be weaponized? And his response is, someone doesn't have to weaponize the bird flu. The birds are doing that.
Yeah.
Which is chilling.
Yeah. The guy on Joe Rogan's podcast, the CDC dude, Joe Rogan asked him, was like, oh, he basically asked them a bunch of like rumor questions. He's like, these are like common questions that we get and we want to like either confirm or debunk these things. Just get it on there. He's like, was this created in a lab? And I've seen some people who I like who just think that this was like either weaponized, escaped from a lab in Wuhan, or the American government sent it over there to destroy the Chinese industry, which is totally fucking insane. And the guy basically said, look, we can't make diseases that are as effective as this. Like what we make is just very simple. It might kill a lot of people, but it's also easy to beat, because you're just making something simple. Like nature makes crazy shit because it's evolution. These diseases are evolved over millions of years to do what they do, to jump between species and take over hosts and whatnot. Like nature is way scarier than any conspiracy.
Absolutely. And it also brings up that refrain that you get from conspiracy-oriented people. Follow the money. Just follow the money. You just got to follow the money. Obviously, it's always worth following the money, but that doesn't mean you've called out what's happening.
Yeah.
It just means that you live in a world where money is privileged.
Yeah.
So there's no insight there.
Yeah. What the neoliberal reptilians want is everybody placid as calm cows buying shit. And people are like hunkering down, not buying shit, even though there's like a run on toilet paper and stuff like that. Like the economy's lost something. The American economy's lost something like $17 billion in a week or two. And that's not what the system wants. The system wants, the reason why it's so good at taking in causes and turning them into, like buy CFL light bulbs now, or like let's have corporate pride days. Like it's interested in calming people and like bringing everybody to a level because that's the most profitable system.
Absolutely. However, and I am in no way saying that there's any cause and effect here. I'm saying this is an effect that, like anything that happens in the world, generally speaking, those with power maintain their power and often come out with more. And so, for example, one thing we'll absolutely see is, you thought Amazon was already big? Well, all these stores are shutting down.
Yep.
It used to be, oh, it's so convenient. I can just stay home and get my stuff. Well, now it's, oh, I have to stay home, and the only way I can get my stuff is through Amazon.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, two things about that. I think that's a really astute thing to notice. But two things. One, it's kind of how I live anyway. It's where I'm basically a shut-in. Like, I don't like going out. I don't like talking to people. If it can be delivered to my house, that's my preference. This weekend, I saw people like, oh, I'm so bored. Like, dude, I read 800 pages of Gotham Central and could not have been more fucking stoked. And now there's no FOMO because there's nothing going on out there. And just, there's nothing to miss out on.
Chad, that sucked.
But so there's that. Like, it's like now, like if you're like me, this is like a fucking joyous time, I guess. I mean, I don't want other people to have a bad time. I was happy to have people having fun out there in the world. The other is like Amazon kind of doing the right thing a little bit. Like they're watching prices on gouge stuff. Like, so they're like cracking the fuck down on just disaster entrepreneurship. Like there's a story in the New York Times about this dude who bought $17,000 worth of hand sanitizer or maybe 17,000 bottles or something like that. And he went on Amazon and was like, ha ha ha, it's straight up arbitrage, bro. And they shut him the fuck down. It's weird. It's like this kind of, like everybody talks about like Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, where the first part is like the invisible hand of the market and the market's going to do whatever it is. But the other book that Adam Smith wrote talks about like the morality that's required in order for a system like that to work. And I can't even remember the name of the book. It's so uncited. But I think it's like why we need to be not assholes or something like that. Yield, whatever. But it's weird to see companies kind of acting the way you want companies to act. Like in the Bay Area, all these tech companies were like, you guys don't need to be here, so go home. Like my office shut down mandatory. They were like, you guys can't come in. I was like, but the snacks. And they're like, no, go home. And I'm curious to see how it reshapes the economy. Because if my company discovers like, hey, look, we actually all like working like this remotely and things like that, I will move the fuck to Nashville or something like that. That would be great.
Right. Okay. So today at around 3:00, I got the message, literally a text from my boss saying, shut the bar down now. I was working, I had customers, and it said, Gavin Newsom just put out the word, we got to shut down. And I've really been thinking about how all these tech workers in the Bay Area and in the world that have been sent home to work from home are going to be fine. Like for the most part, nothing's really changed for so many people in that industry, but it certainly has for me and everybody in industries like mine where Monique, my wife, teaches yoga. That's zero. I serve drinks, zero. But that's just idiosyncratic to the problem. Say the grid, say the grid went down, which could happen. As crazy as a pandemic is.
I mean, we're going to see a correction in the market for tech companies once all the VC money dries up. I mean, it's going to be a bloodbath.
Right. But I'm also thinking like, something interferes with the power grid, something interferes with the internet in North America or like Silicon Valley or something like that could happen. Everybody who's in the tech industry is going to have a lot of money and a lot of free time. And that's when I would be making, like if that happened instead of COVID-19, I would be making out like a bandit. I would probably have to open the bar early.
Well, that happened to me when I guess I've been very lucky in my life. Like when the first .com bust happened here in the Bay Area, I was bartending and there was months where an entire company would come into the bar at this happy hour that I worked that was usually completely dead. And there would be like 40 people there drinking their sorrows away, using their credit cards because it hadn't really caught on yet. That they were like, oh, I'll just get another job. And you're like, okay, buddy. Yep. And I made a shitload of money during the prime part of the .com bust. Yeah. So totally, I think you're right.
Well, it's definitely also has me thinking, okay, I've got a minimum of 2 weeks. Who knows how long I'm not going to be at work. I can take this opportunity as, oh, I'm an artist. I can be more focused on my work. But it's also giving me a moment of like, hey, that moment of time where you couldn't hashtag learn to code on Twitter? Maybe I should learn to code. Like now would be my time. Now would be the moment to take on a better skill. Well, not better. I don't know.
It's just a different. I mean, the thing is, it's just a diverse skill set. You know what I mean? That's the thing that's good. Like, the thing that really kicked me off, like wanting to leave bartending and go get a degree and all this stuff, was like when Hurricane Katrina happened. My parents are bartenders and they were fucked during Hurricane Katrina. Yes. And to me, I thought to myself, like, man, like that seems like a very precarious way to live.
That's the thing, is this moment is difficult for me because of the type of work I'm in, but it's also exposed how precarious it is because, I mean, not to do you versus me, but if your entire industry went down like I just described, you would actually be fine for a while, probably longer than I, because you have developed more resources, one would assume.
You mean like just like money saved?
Money saved.
Yeah.
And you could also have not saved any money and been an idiot with the money you're taking in too.
I'm a Dave Ramsey guy. I'm going to be just fine.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas I'm more paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. And so it's not just the industry, it's also the precariousness.
Yeah, but I mean, just having lived paycheck to paycheck for so long is one of the things that's made me so careful with the money I have now. You know, like I
You'd
feel
think
like,
it would have that effect on me.
well, I mean, like like the difference is like you are an artist and I'm not. You know, so you have a different draw on your resources than
Yeah.
I do. You know, like I'll set some money on fire on some fucking graphic novels or something like that every once in a while, but it's always like I'm not splitting. Like I don't have music gear to buy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but the funny thing is that question about music gear to buy. Speaking of Dave Ramsey, I come back to this all the time. Could any artist call Dave Ramsey and have a conversation that didn't exclusively involve him berating them for being spending money on being an artist?
No, I think that like a lot of people, like you might have a misapprehension of what he would say, whereas he's like, his position would be like, if you are going to try and make a life as an artist, then you need to think about your art as a business, and not
Right.
like not in a bummer kind of way, but like, okay, you are a photographer and you take crazy like anarchist nudes, great, but can you also do weddings?
Right.
You know, like, can you use the skill? Because his whole thing is like, you are going through life developing certain skills, and those skills are mobilized for a variety of reasons. So for example, me in writing, right? Like I
Yeah.
wanted to be like a fucking drug-addled Bukowski dude in my 20s. Like I thought that was the way to go and write all this stuff. But it turns out like I can also write, you know, vegetable puns and tech FAQs, you know? So there's this idea that there's like, it's negative to have like a shadow career. You know, that whole thing about shadow careers? It's basically like you, like, for example, me, like I'm a writer and I always wanted to write a novel or something. And now I'm in this career that is like the thing that I really want to do because of, you know, my own failures. But to me, like I was lucky enough to be able to translate a skill set that I had spent my whole life developing into something that just happens to be pretty profitable right now. And it was because I was less precious about it. And I think some people are like, they have this fantasy like, oh, I'm going to make it or die. Like, yeah, you're not going to die. You're going to be poor and sad and sick for a long time. Like, that's the reality. And to me, like, I got scared, you know, like seeing what my parents went through in Katrina. I was like, well, fuck, you know, what am I going to do here? Like, I have to make choices. And I think a lot of people could make choices. And then, you know, like, if the tech industry exploded, I'm a really fucking fast bartender. I can go do that, you know, like, so it's not like those skills go away.
Yeah.
So I think the lesson is just diversification of, you know, income and skill.
Yeah.
So I'd say definitely learn to code.
Okay.
Yeah. Because you never know. Like it's the Steve Jobs thing. Like, okay, you are a musician and you have this great set of people around you that are cool and artistic. What if you do have this coding skill set and one of your collaborators, instead of saying like, hey, let's make some like dance performance art, like you guys figure out some new crazy thing through those skills coming together. It could be, you know, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Who knows? I mean, your podcasting class thing, I think, is a fucking killer idea. Like, there's so many ways
It's true.
to develop. Like, a lot of people want to make podcasts. I think everybody should make podcasts. I mean, we kind of talk about it a little bit, but like, I fucking hate corporate podcasting. I hate late night show dudes having podcasts. And the only answer for that is people like us or other interesting people doing their own thing, and a lot of them don't know how to do it.
I feel like we're in this moment where it's 1967 and everybody's starting a rock band, and I could be a guitar teacher for a living.
Yeah. And there's no bummer in that. Like, there's a Kurt Cobain documentary, and they talk about Kurt Cobain's aunt was a guitar teacher, and she kind of taught him the basic chords and stuff like that. Like, yeah, she probably made a basic living. She didn't go on tour with Nirvana, but she fucking created Kurt Cobain. Like, and that is badass.
Right.
You know, like not everybody gets to be, you know, the arena rock super god. Like, there's a lot of people, like, that's where I'm at in my life. It's like, I don't really care if I ever write a book these days. I'm just stoked to go about my life.
Yeah. Speaking of American ingenuity, I can't help but note that if there's a hero to this film, it's American ingenuity.
Yep.
It's California science.
Yep.
And renegade doctors.
Yep.
I mean, they're obviously working for these huge institutions, but it comes down to the American narrative of there's a lot of team playing in this movie, but really it comes down to two renegade people who take risks.
I mean, that's the argument for the American healthcare system, which people hate right now. It's like, we make most of the crazy medicines that are doing shit, and it's because people are incentivized either financially or for glory. And I think that when you remove those incentives, those like reptile brain incentives, it will produce less great things. Like, I don't know, maybe, who knows? Maybe I'm just so fucking hardcore libertarian. I can't not be like that, you know? But I think what's cool about Contagion is it shows that sort of rebellious intelligence in lockstep with government. You know, like, that's what's cool. You know, this one doctor fucking cracks the case like House MD, but then there's an army of people that mobilizes it and gets it out in the world and makes it happen in concert. You know, it's almost like in the Republic, you know, the idea that there would be these special people who did special things, but in the service of the people, you know.
You mean philosopher kings who can't take profit from being...
Well, not so much the philosopher kings, so that's kind of a different thing. That's like people who want to lead, but there's like there are exceptional people, and that they do deserve to be thought of as exceptional. But it's better if they have the people in mind. You know, you can't just say like, well, everybody has to do this for the people. You have to. It's like you need to have the freedom to do the thing that's excellent, but also the desire to make it work for people. It's weird, man. Like, and I don't know what drives that ethic now. Or what would?
Yeah. I also am curious going forward how the narrative is going to be spun about how America dealt with this. Mm-hmm. Because on the one hand, America does a lot of things pretty fucking well. Like that's science fact.
Yeah.
But there's a degree to which containing a pandemic requires a lot of people to collectively agree to certain things. And Americans have a very hard time doing that. It's in the belief system of this country, and that's why we have like the anti-vaxxer movement have so much traction. Is
very quiet these days, though.
Oh, did you see that meme? Like, just because they're all dead. But you know, anti-vaxxers, it's definitely partly pseudo new age, that sort of end of thing, conspiracy theory, but it's also like, you don't get to tell me what to do. And the resistance against that is like, well, I do because you are at risk of like harming me and my kids because of your own stupidity, ignorance, and negligence. You know, it's not like the anti-vaxxer movement is that big in this country, but what contributes to the anti-vaxxer movement is actually quite widespread, which is Americans won't be told what to do no matter what, even at the penalty of potentially spreading a pandemic, right? And that's going to be interesting to see how that works out because, well, okay, what's very frustrating to me right now is I probably went 6 months without saying the name Donald Trump. And I've probably said his name more in the last 2 weeks than I had in the last 2 years.
Man, you got that TDS flare up.
It's fucking, it itches like hell. Yeah. And part of my frustration is, like I was saying earlier, power just floats above. I think he's going to come out stronger than ever because I really believe that he is the stopped clock that's right twice a day. So he says all this fucking nonsense, but one of the random things he says is, oh, I don't think it's as high as 2%. Turns out that's probably right. It has nothing to do with him having any insight. It's just one of the random things that he just sort of said that was positive. So every time he said something positive about America and about the virus, if he's wrong, he just rolls past it. If he's right, he takes credit for it. And I think that no matter what happens next, he's going to take credit for everything positive that happens in the tail of this.
Yeah. I mean, I have mixed feelings about one. I think it's like, okay, just say, you know, politician X. If they're going to get the blame for something, they should also get the praise for something. That's just how it should work.
Right.
But I just feel like the entire way that people are elected is just fucking bullshit. I mean, it's like the reason why we have this clown president is because we have fucking roast battles to decide who gets to be the nominees for these parties. Like, I mean, it's like the entire way the DNC nomination process has been covered. It's basically like nobody goes, okay, let me see your plan. Like if I were to like go get a job as a project manager at any tech company, I would have to show somebody how I put projects together, how I plan things, like how I actually do the job. And these people just rip on people on each other for shit that they said in the 90s and like score sick burns. And then whoever got the sickest burn and has the deepest pockets gets to move forward. I think it's totally fucked up. I mean, I think that, each one of these candidates should have to sit in a fucking podcast scenario for like 3 hours. And like, I want to hear, okay, Joe Biden, explain your crime bill and what you would do differently and like what you've actually learned from it. Like, we're not necessarily going to like disqualify you for it, but like, hey man, explain yourself. Or Bernie Sanders, like, hey, where does the money for all this shit come from? Like, like, okay, everybody gets free college. I'd like to see K through 12 a little more taken care of before that happens. Like, I'm okay with more money to students, but like, let's get the graduation rate higher before we start graduating people in polka theory or whatever,
Fair.
Yeah, it's the whole way. It's like, if you have a media that celebrates fucking weirdness, you're going to get weird candidates.
Sure.
And like, to me, like, Trump is just a symptom of that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Another thing that I'm very curious to see how it rolls out after all of this starts to die down is where we land with the idea of globalization.
Mm-hmm.
Because so much of this reminds me of, remember when there was tainted spinach?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like we've had one on lettuce and one on spinach where like people died.
Yep.
And the reason is because, like in the case of spinach, like, oh, all the spinach in North America goes through this one plant.
Yep.
And so if it's tainted there, you're all fucked. And that's the way the supply chain works. And because of globalism, that is true of humans.
Yep.
So it turns out after there's a certain degree of spread, travel bans don't actually do as much as reacting xenophobically would have you believe. But having, how to put this, shitty decisions about the health and welfare of the citizens of Wuhan should have absolutely no effect on my personal health. Turns out it might send me into the black.
Yeah, I mean, like, I feel
we
like
shouldn't live in that world, but
Yeah.
we already, in a sense, we already do because, like, for example, the foreign policy of America dictates how a lot of the world works, and that's unfortunate too. But I sort of feel like the less that sort of shit happens, the better.
Yeah, it's fucking insane that like, something like 85% of our medicines are made in China. And if they decided to shut the supply off, which they're not going to do because they want to sell that stuff. But like, if they wanted to, they could kill millions of Americans just by shutting supply lines down. To me, that seems like, from a tactical mindset, seems absolutely terrible. Like, I would rather see that shit done in Mexico, like strengthen our neighbor's economy, like, and yeah, I'm not like a, fuck the Chinese government type of dude necessarily, but they are committing human rights violations at like a staggering amount, and we should have been punishing them for that before. And it's not like about Chinese people; it's about government, like that autocratic government. Just what they're doing to their like Muslim minority is fucking insane.
Yeah.
You should be like, okay, yeah, we're gonna like maybe build some of our own shit over here, not because it's like some crazy like American Eagle, make America great thing, but like it's just fucking safer too. And also like, hey, like we don't want to do business with you. Maybe we'll do business with India for a minute. Which it seems that they're trying to do right now, but who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
Oh, what else?
It's interesting how this movie is like number 8 on iTunes or something like that, and The Stand isn't. Even though that's a miniseries and is a little bit longer, but
It's
like
also generally considered pretty good. Contagion is a great movie.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. Is like, this is just a super tight, well written, well acted, well shot.
I think as of a couple months ago, before this all exploded, I had streamed Contagion so many times that I bought it because I knew I would probably end up watching it a couple more times. So, I mean, that's my feeling about this movie. Like,
yeah. Another thing about it is that it doesn't really have a happy ending, but it has a hopeful ending.
Yeah.
And I think that
America solves problems.
Yeah, I mean, what's kind of interesting about it is like the problems are so well researched that you kind of hope that the solution is also well researched, and then that's also a thing that can come out the other side.
Right.
I mean, like, you think about it, even if this COVID virus was allowed to just rip across the world, it doesn't kill everybody. Like people, the world goes on. It's not like The Stand where everybody fucking dies and the good people have to go to Boulder, Colorado, and bad people have to go to Las Vegas. And then just fight it out over like some sort of like cornfield or whatever the fuck happens in the movie. That's how I like the end of the movie where, the prom does happen. Like a thing happens, like life is moving.
Yeah. But again, it's funny because it's Soderbergh. It's not like the string swell and the triumph of the human spirit unites us all. It's just like, people persevere. Roll credits.
Yeah, like any other like bullshit director, there would be like a fucking American flag.
Like Independence Day or something like that.
Yeah, it would be like as terrible and manipulative as anything else. I just fucking love Soderbergh as a director, man. Like I feel like I can't think of a single one of his movies that he's made that I haven't liked.
I saw Bubbles. I thought it was terrible, but I also
haven't seen
totally respected what he was trying to do with it because he just had this idea and he fucking did it, and it didn't work for me, but much respect.
I mean, think about like how good the pacing of Ocean's 11 is. Like that movie is like
I love
it just fucking jams, man. Like it is like an arena rock song of a movie, and it's like perfectly cast. It's interesting. Yeah. It's fun. Soderbergh, I think, has like a real connection to 70s film. And this is like a straight up 70s paranoia film, like Andromeda Strain or something like that, or any of the nuclear scare films that came out in the early 80s. But this, it's just so well done. And like all this, like I think what really sells his movies to me is he puts great actors into super minor roles and like they're like the mycelium of the film. Like they connect all these things and it just makes the whole thing have more life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So rather than horror movies about myths that we already have, like zombies and vampires and werewolves, right? There are horror movies that aren't about myths, but things that already exist. And that's, usually actually more like thrillers, less horror movies that are about like earthquakes and tornadoes and sharknadoes, things that really exist. So if you were to develop a screenplay that addresses another real world issue, like how Contagion does, whether local or global, and do it with the realism of a movie like Contagion, what would it be?
It would probably be... Like I joked before when you asked me this before, I said it would be like a virulent form of herpes outbreak for furries or something like that, which is funny.
Which would be fucking fascinating.
Yeah. But to me, like there's two things that are interesting. Like what happens when a terrorist organization finally does set off a dirty bomb? Like that to me is just super terrifying. Like that is like in the way that Contagion rolled out something that could easily have happened. Like there's a bunch of missing uranium in Russia. Like nobody great has it. You know what I mean? No, it's not like some billionaire was like, I'm going to buy this and just take it off the market. Like that's not happening. It's in some cave someplace, and some guy's putting it in a pressure cooker right now and just waiting for his moment. That shit is terrifying to me. And then the other thing is just like the idea that the media could whip up a small event into something fucking crazy and have a whole city burn down. Like a Rodney King riot sort of situation, but way more widespread, like a state-to-state one. I think those two would be the two for me.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I think with these thrillers, like I was saying, an earthquake or a tornado, there's an embedded action, right? You've got an earthquake that something is fucking happening and you can show a cow whipping past the camera or cars falling into the earth. But what's interesting about Contagion is that it's actually quite banal. People just kind of get sick, which we all have, and we all know what that looks like. Yep. And it's not terrifying. It just sucks for a while.
Yeah.
And most of us bounce back from that. So I love that this movie's kind of based on a pragmatic banality that goes past being banal into being frightening.
Yeah, it's a normcore pandemic.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
But... a TV series that I thought was really interesting somewhat recently, it's from Norway and it's called Occupied. And it is a show in which the narrative is that what if Russia used certain legal means to weasel its way into Norway's oil economy and kind of used that as a backdoor to actually occupy Norway. And because they did it legally, there was no recourse with the European Union, with the UN. They can't ask America for help because it was all done legally, but Norway is literally being completely consumed as if by violent takeover, but it's all legal and it's very chill. I think things like that are really interesting. You know, what you were saying about China withholding medicine, like that would actually be terrifying.
Yep.
And could make for this exact kind of film. So I think it would be interesting if it was more sort of political. So not political war, but political like, oh, if A just doesn't do B, what happens? Oh, this law that exists, what if they actually followed through on it? What would happen? Because these are all what ifs, right? It's all answering what ifs. I mean, most fiction is, but it's just a matter of amping that up to some degree.
Yeah, in some ways,
Like what ifs have huge human costs, but aren't necessarily action movies or zombie films.
yeah, this pushes it more in like the realm of science fiction. Like Contagion, in some ways, is a science fiction movie.
Yeah.
You know, like there's like an alien, which is basically the virus, and then there's how does technology deal with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's one of the. I have actually been reading a lot more science fiction than any sort of horror stuff lately. Like it's kind of like this. I wonder if like globally right now, like horror movies are doing better or worse, because I think one of the reasons why
Right now, you mean the last 2
like
weeks?
right now, last 2 weeks, because I feel like one of the things that made me just forever not really scared by dumb horror movie stuff is I grew up with like nuclear threat in the face. So that shit was always really terrifying to me. So some fucking burn up child molester with knife fingers just is not going to do it. You know,
Right.
I wonder, terrifying doll seems fucking stupid when somebody could cough on you and you could die.
Yeah.
You know?
Another element of this film that I love that seems very prescient. So much of this movie is holy shit.
Yeah.
But one element is that the use of camera work, especially at the very, very beginning, where it's mostly focused on hands and just following hands and tracing
Beer
this person
nuts.
touched this and the beer nuts.
Yeah.
And then you go online and you go to the CDC website or you see on Instagram people posting like what to do, what not to do. And there are all these drawings of don't touch your face, wash your hands. And it's like this exact same thing that this movie used as a framing device to amp up the subtle plague, the horror, to frame the horror.
Yeah. Another thing I think is so accurate is how it's just whipping through the service industry. You know, like just like it goes from a farm to a chef to a waiter to a lady.
Yep,
You know, it's like whoa.
And I'm that waiter.
Yeah. And I'm at your house. What the fuck am I doing?
I don't know what you're doing here.
It's fine. If I die, it'll be fine. What did you think about how like the ending of it like brings it like back to day one? I thought that was just like a great way to end the film.
That was great. Sort of almost like Irreversible or something like that. But no, I thought it was great. And it made it.
It's very detective-y.
It was, and I
Yeah.
didn't think of it that way until you brought it up earlier, but it really is. Like you get the solution at the end and it wraps it up in an interesting way. Also, it wrapping up in exactly the way that COVID-19 probably was birthed is really fucking unfortunate.
Yeah, people need to stop touching bats and pangolins, and yeah, you'd hope that they would make some sort of rule, like the dude from the CDC on Joe Rogan. I can't remember his name. I should remember it. He was talking about how he's actually toured those wet markets, and he had observed how there's basically like a chain that they can go in animals. So it goes from like a bird to a bat to a pig. And he said he goes into this market and there's literally birds stacked on top of pigs. So he's like, if you were trying to engineer viruses, there's
Right.
pretty much no better
Oh,
way of doing it than
God.
this. And like, man, just people need to stop eating fucked up stuff, man. It just across the world. It just like
I mean, a lot of those wet markets, a lot of the economy that drives those markets is the sort of secondary market for, again, fucking remedies where people are taking obscure animals and grinding up their penises and believing it gives them virility. Like that is not a small industry in China and extending through parts of that region.
It's so weird to me that like Viagra hasn't killed that industry. Like there's a fucking pill that does the thing that the rhino horn's supposed to do.
Again, literally does that exact thing.
Yeah,
Rather than do this
perfectly.
obscure, weird side route to a thing that doesn't work, you can do the thing that absolutely works. And that's again proof that like humans aren't always looking for the real solution, you know?
Yeah, it's weird. There's probably somebody out there who thinks that like there's mind control agents in fucking Viagra. They would rather have rhino horn. I mean, it's so crazy. That weird like Christopher Hitchens thing too, like about like just some cultures are just better than other cultures. And it's like, okay, our technocratic culture is better. I mean, is like the developed sciencey stuff like gonna have to say yes?
Although our culture, do you mean you and I as opposed to the Scarlet Sage down the street that sells all those herbs? Because that's our culture too.
That's not my
and that's
culture.
just as fucking weird as like ground up tiger paw.
Yeah, I guess though the difference is they're not selling any animal parts in there that I know of. I mean, I don't know if they have like chicken feed, but you have that shit in Botanicas, like those like
It's
weird.
the same ignorance, though. I guess that's. I mean, like there's definitely a difference between like murdering and stacking near extinct animals and a bunch of herbs grown in someone's garden.
Yeah.
But it preys upon the same sort of willful ignorance about cause and effect in this universe.
You know, another way of looking at it though isn't as ignorance. Alan Moore has this idea. He says all fire is the same fire, and the idea is that the spirit that mobilizes the doctor to create the vaccine that works is the same spirit that caused the first shaman to dance around in a circle to bring rain. And it's the same urge. It's like this creative urge, and that it's basically like all of this stuff is just creativity mobilized in a certain way. So it's more appropriate for certain times. And yeah, I don't know. So it's like, yeah, you do sneer at the sachet of herbs to keep yourself safe from the flu, but it's the same impulse. It's like, for example, like I'm like, yeah, fuck these fucking nerds with their stupid herbs. But I can't make a vaccine, like left to my own devices in this neighborhood, I'm going to have to go get some elderberry or something,
Right.
Yeah.
What else we got?
I mean, there's little moments in this movie that I think are interesting, like with the truth serum. The name of the blog is Truth Serum.
Yeah.
And I think that at the time there was more of a dismissive attitude towards alternative media. He says, "Oh, you're a blogger. That's just is it a
graffiti with?"
It's a grammar as a graffiti or something like that.
Yeah.
And then the little moments where like the kids are talking about like, oh, if neither of us have it, neither of us can get it from each other. It's like the weird like folk ideas. Like I remember being so fucking scared of AIDS in the early 90s, like when somebody on Phil Donahue came on there and said by like 2002 3/4 of heterosexual couples are going to have HIV. Like that's how fucking crazy it is. And you're like, holy shit. And I remember, this is a memory I had, is I had gotten like a blowjob off of some questionable girl when I was like 17 years old, like some squatter chick or something like that. And I called up one of those like, we'll answer your questions, free condom lines, and I said, hey, look, this is a situation. I'm really scared of, could I have gotten AIDS? And like now we know that it would be nearly impossible for me to get AIDS from some girl giving me a blowjob. It's just not really transmitted. Like for me to get it from her, like almost impossible. Like I'd have to have a cut on my dick, and she'd have to have a cut in her mouth, and like she'd have to spit blood on it, and then so. But the dude on the other line, the expert, goes, "You need to go get tested tomorrow."
What?
And it fucking freaked me the fuck out. And what was interesting is like the guy sound. I mean, people sound different ways, but the guy had like a gay sounding voice, and afterwards I was like years later I was like, was he just like thinking I was some stupid fucking straight idiot? Like, and wasn't afraid or shouldn't have been? I don't know. Like, was it like, did he just not know, or was he just trying to freak me out on purpose, or what? Like, but it was just such a weird moment. And then until I got my test like 2 weeks later, I was fucking terrified.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, you're like, oh, actually, there was no danger there, but somebody who was in a position of authority created fear.
Yeah.
And then I've experienced that like a bunch of times in my life, not just that, but like somebody in authority creating fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's weird.
Speaking of HIV and fear, I'm finding, if you go online, you can find every fucking opinion. So just putting that aside, people I talk to and mutual friends and things like that, I'm kind of surprised how capricious some people are about it. Like, not that many people are going to die from it. Like, well, do you feel that it's not you and therefore you care less? What the fuck is the matter with you?
Yeah.
But friends of mine who are HIV positive or are old enough to have lived through the plague of the 80s and early 90s of AIDS are really on high alert right now.
Yeah.
And I think my interpretation of their elevated level of concern is because they know what it's like to watch a lot of people die.
Yep.
You can go, oh, it's only this percentage, but like, yeah, let's say this has a 1% mortality rate and everybody gets it, right? If you've never seen 1% of your friends just die, you might be capricious about it. If you're on the other end of it, you'd be like, holy shit, 1%.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if you've lived through a plague, even though this is a lesser plague, it's still a reminder, like, yeah, people dying is fucking awful. And doing whatever you can to get the information out to persevere through it is absolutely essential and nothing to be cocky about because you're feeling young and invincible.
Yeah, I mean, like you don't even have to be that old to have it fucked up. Like our, you know, buddy Scott from Popcorn Piss and Vinegar podcast, his brother's 45 years old, perfect health, on a ventilator right now. Like, you know, and then at the same time in New Orleans, there's like people going out, like the cops had to clear Bourbon Street on Saturday, you know, and be like, get the fuck out of here.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just weird. Part of you hopes that like, okay, you beat the virus, right? Like, I wish that the media was a little more like, hey, we can all do this together, like World War II style. You know, like, hey, we'll beat this virus because we're fucking America, instead of like blame.
Right.
It's like, let's like concentrate on beating the thing instead of blaming people for being behind.
Yeah.
Even they may deserve the blame. Like, I feel like it would be better to unify a mass group of people than to condemn some clown.
Yeah.
I don't know. So what are you going to do for a few weeks?
I don't know. I feel like the next 48 hours I'm going to sit and really think about, like, I have some free time. It's time to meditate in a way, like, okay, yeah, I can rewatch Buffy the Vampire Slayer and then rewatch some other TV series, right?
Yep.
And then go like, oh, I got a vacation, a staycation. But I would rather take it as a moment to sort of go like, oh, I can actually take a step back from my life and think about what I want the next, I'm almost 50. I don't have that much longer. Might as well think about what I want the rest to look like. And if I want to make some changes, like talking about earlier, learn to code, like, this is probably that moment, right?
Yeah. Our buddy Jason, well, not our buddy, but a dude I went to high school with, Jason Tubes, he got, laid off in October or something like that. And really similar, he's like, I'm going to go do that coding academy. He's like, I've worked on the outskirts of tech for so long, I'm just going to get into it, and, it's like a skill set that is not going to go away. People are going to need to make stuff. And,
I just wish I wasn't so bodily fluid averse, because I would just go learn to be a plumber like tomorrow. But I can't even stand the gelatinous substance that forms in clean pipes, let alone dirty ones.
Yeah, the number of plumbers that are living badass lives and that call into the Dave Ramsey show is
no
just
matter what
crazy
awful things happen in this world, whether again it's illness or the grid goes down or whatever, plumbers, you need them.
Yeah, you don't even hear about Bernie Sanders trying to socialize plumbing. You know what I mean? It's like, it's going to be fucking fine no matter what. Yeah. If I had to do it all over again, I think I probably would have picked some sort of trade, or even like, probably nursing probably would have been the thing I would have gone for, because nurses are making like, I saw somebody posted that they could make right now like $100 and something an hour if they wanted to, which is crazy. I mean, they deserve it, of course, but
Yeah.
just like recession-proof jobs, I think is just interesting.
Yeah, no, for sure. Is that it?
Yeah, I think so. I guess if you're not working right now, definitely think about what you could do when the economy comes back, because it's going to. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I mean, this is that moment. Like, if you got to make some changes, this might be a good moment to think about that and start working on it. But at the same time, all of our listeners and everybody they know and everybody they know, I hope you're not struggling. I hope you can get through. This is fucking scary.
Yeah.
I have a lot of friends that have no savings and no safety net and no family that can swoop in and take them in, and they're fucking terrified.
Yeah. And I think conversely, if you've like put yourself into a position like I have and you're ordering shit, fucking tip 25% minimum, man. Like if some miserable bastard's got to bring you your fucking order, you should break them off, because, you know, like I worked fucking hard to get where I'm at. So I definitely am not ashamed of it or sad of it or anything like that. But, you know, if you make money, you should be able to fucking spread it around a little bit, not because some old socialist tells you to, just because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. All right. Stay safe, everybody. So again, join our mailing list at scarythoughts.org. You can email us at whatthe@scarythoughts.org. Any last things?
I don't know, wash your asses, people.
Damn straight. Thanks for listening. You
Don't.
can. Oh, go.
Oh, sorry, never mind.
What?
Never mind.
That bad, huh?
Yeah.